When we think of Nazi Germany's war machine, we imagine tanks, planes, and ruthless generals. But behind the iron and firepower was forced labor. Millions of men, women, even children, enslaved by the regime to keep its war effort alive. Some were miners, some built weapons, and shockingly, some were forced to crack codes, build bunkers, and operate the gears of military intelligence. This is the untold story of how Hitler's war machine ran on the backs of the enslaved, and how the Nazis used them, even in silence and shadow, to wage their war of domination. By the start of Nazi Germany was rapidly expanding, in territory and ambition. But war needs fuel, weapons, roads, factories, communications, manpower. And with millions of Germans fighting abroad, Hitler turned to slavery. In 1938, the Nazis formed the Reich Labor Service, and later the organization TOT, which oversaw massive infrastructure projects using enslaved civilians and prisoners. After the invasions of Poland, France, and the Soviet Union, millions were captured and deported to work. Estimates say over 13 million forced laborers were used during the war, one of the largest systems of slavery in modern history. They came from everywhere: Poles, Russians, Ukrainians, French citizens, Yugoslavs, Jewish prisoners, political dissidents, POWs, and tragically, even children as young as 12 were forced into labor. They worked in brutal conditions, barely fed, often beaten and treated as disposable. But forced labor wasn't only about digging trenches or building roads. Some were sent into secret facilities, where they helped decode intercepted messages, manufacture V-weapons, and support the Nazi intelligence infrastructure, without fully knowing the purpose of their work. Here's what most people don't know. The Nazis used forced laborers in military communication centers, encrypting and decrypting data, duplicating documents, and repairing signal lines. In places like Dachau and Buchenwald, slave workers were ordered to retype decoded Allied messages, build radio equipment, and assemble parts for Enigma-type machines. They were considered low risk because many didn't speak German well, or were too weak and scared to resist. In some camps, Polish and French engineers were forced to design and test mechanical devices used by the German High Command. Some of them, knowing the stakes, sabotaged equipment from the inside. A quiet resistance, whispered through gears and wires. Nowhere was Nazi forced labor more horrifying, or more tied to their military ambitions, than in the production of V-2 rockets. These vengeance weapons were Hitler's dream of turning the war around. They were built in the Mittelwerk, a vast underground factory inside the Dora Mittelbau concentration camp. Tens of thousands of enslaved workers were forced to dig tunnels and build rockets under impossible conditions. They worked 12 to 14 hours a day with no sunlight, breathing in toxic dust, beaten for the smallest mistake. Over 20,000 workers died, more than the number of people killed by the actual V-2 rockets. Let that sink in. More people died making the rockets than from the rockets themselves. Despite torture and death looming over them, many prisoners resisted, quietly. Some workers installed tiny flaws in parts. Others mistranslated technical documents or intentionally delayed shipments. One Jewish engineer at Buchenwald reportedly reversed wiring in guidance systems, causing weapons to fail. These acts of defiance, though invisible, were acts of courage, done at great personal risk. Their stories were lost or buried for decades, but they mattered. When the war ended, millions of surviving laborers were freed, broken in body, traumatized in spirit. Some returned home to no recognition. Others remained displaced for years in foreign lands. The Nazi industrialists who profited from their suffering, like executives from Daimler, Krupp, IG Farben, were tried at Nuremberg, but many received light sentences, or none at all. To this day, survivors of Nazi forced labor have struggled for recognition and reparations. Their stories are not in textbooks. They are footnotes in history, when they should be headlines. The Nazi war machine was not just built by generals, scientists, or soldiers. It was built by enslaved hands, by the forgotten millions who labored in silence, under chains, to fuel a genocidal empire. And among them were those who decoded, assembled, and even sabotaged the very weapons Hitler counted on to win. They may not have worn uniforms, but they fought, in the shadows, with every bolt, every keystroke, every silent act of rebellion. We remember them not just as victims, but as unsung resistors and quiet heroes of a dark era. Follow Time Chronicles to bring more hidden history to light.